All right, so this is AP Lit, and we're talking about the House of the Seven Gables um, today. So everybody with me? I recommend that you write it down if there are things that you hear that you don't know. Um, I tell you, I mean, we talked about yesterday about reactions and from that poem, and you know, we teachers don't always get it. One thing you can consistently do that can be observed, and that's taking notes. It's easy for us to spot students who are checked out. If you're taking notes, you're not checked out. So anyway, let me just start here. Chapter 8, the pension of today. Don't overlook titles. Even the poem we did yesterday, it tells you, didn't mention the word poem at all in the poem. Didn't mention that they were seniors, which actually has some connotative value. I don't know what you think of when you think of seniors, but I often think of the word senioritis, you know, and so it's funny how different connotations from your perspective, but you wouldn't have known they were seniors or they were doing poetry if you didn't have the title. The pension of today, I don't know if that helps much, but just take note of that. I think this is the one of Phoebe. I may have mentioned this the other day, but just little things in the story, like this comment on the first page, and that's why you have to underline, because I would have never remembered this. And in a big book, you might be able to use it, you might not. There's more here than you could possibly use on a paper. But he makes the comment that this remarkable urchin, and that was his word, the narrator's word for the little boy that comes in, he's a street urchin. And he says, in truth was the very emblem of old Father Time, both in respect to his all-devouring appetite for men and things. He just kept eating these cookies, and the cookies were in the shape of animals. And I think the theme of time, this is a very little, but it shows the consistency of the author. Even time does, this is a book about time and how sin generations ago are duplicated or in some way in us. And we're not there yet, but there's a comment later. Well, I'll just wait till we get there, but it just describes the judge to the colonel. So anyway, that comment is just a reminder of this theme of time, that time does devour things. In the case of the pensions, time is causing their family to get smaller and diminishes the family in every way. It's in that first paragraph on page 79. I think we have the same page number. And this is a scene that I think over the years when people wrote about the book, I've never heard anybody mention this. That's why I wanted to go through some of this. And that's when the judge is coming to visit Clifford, and when he sees Phoebe, they are related. They are cousins at the very least. And so he leans over. Do you remember this scene? He leans over to kiss her. We may have mentioned this the other day. And she backs off because she sees something. It was just instinctive that she didn't like. And he looked really foolish. And his face changes, almost like Jekyll and Hyde. And he becomes this dark kind of angry face that he then quickly changes back. But it's this theme of the hypocrisy. I think that's important to notice, that he is not what he appears to be. Big theme in a lot of books, maybe even most books. It seems like that could be a theme. That he's not all he appears to be. And this was the statement. So page 82. And it's the last sentence of the top paragraph. Again, talking about, I think he's starting to make similarities with the old and the new pension. She notices that this judge pension, the newest pension, is compared to the colonel. And she sees the photograph, whatever it is, the daguerreotype on something, a miniature she keeps calling it, and there's something menacing about it. But she makes this comment. It implied that the weaknesses and defects, the bad passions, the mean tendencies, and the moral diseases which lead to crime are handed down from one generation to another by a far surer process of transmission than human laws has been able to establish in respect to the riches and honors which it seeks to entail upon posterity. Well, what it says is that, like, sin is passed down from generation to generation. And I guess the question that raises for me to ask you is, do you know much about your immediate ancestors, your grandparents, probably great-grandparents, but do you know how much you're like them or not like them? Do you know the history of your family? And is it true that you're like Hephzibah and this crowd, they're like doomed to be like this curse it's been handed down from generation to generation? Is that true? Is that really true? Are there things in families that, for positive or negative? I'm thinking of something like everybody in this. Your parents went to college. You're going to go to college. The statistics show that if your parents went to college, you'll probably go to college, and vice versa. There's nothing like virtuous necessarily about going to college, but often in some families, nobody's gone to college. Why is that? Why is it that, maybe it just skips a generation, and then the next generation? Why is it that 2 or 3 generations down the line, nobody's gone to college? The reason I bring that up is because everybody's free to go to college. Everybody goes to high school. But why is it some people are so much like their ancestors that it takes an unusual member of the family? I'll be the first person to go to college. Why? In America, everybody ought to be able to, make your decisions and have the opportunity to do anything you want to. But it seems like families can either help or hold us back. What do you think, Sam?
Well, I think that it's just like the standards that we're held to. Like a family where no one's going to college, like they're not expected to, so they just don't have it in mind.
So what you're agreeing that there's something about your family that came before that has made you what you are, even though you may not even know it. Is that a good thought or a bad thought? Is it scary? You didn't ask to be born into the family you did. I'm sure you're happy that you did, but you are the recipient of all those people that went before. That's one of the themes of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say if somebody that came before you was like a businessman, they didn't go to school. You see their example and you say, oh well, they didn't go to school to get wherever they got to, so I could start something else, and not go to school. So you can just build off of what they did.
Yeah.
Look back on their examples.
So we don't start new every generation. We do build on what went before us. We know. None of my father's brothers went to college. Nobody in my father's family. There was a depression. Why people didn't go to college like they do now. His 3 children, including me, went to college. Our children, my sons went to college. The grandsons are too young yet, but we assume they'll go to college. That's a little different because those were very smart men who were my uncles, but you didn't need to go to college like that. You could make a success without it. But that is one of the things that we have to admit. We are a part of our family. We can disown them all we want to, but we're still part of that. You can't get rid of that. Notice the judge on page 84 and 85. Just note that there's this comparison of the two. And remember what the conclusion was between the judge and the colonel? The judge is a lot like the colonel, with what major seems exception? He's weaker. He's not as strong. He's not as powerful. The qualities that made the colonel either good or bad, maybe both, this guy has, but they're not as strong. He's just simply not the powerful man his ancestor was. On 85, he talked about the throat thing. The male pension is going to die, drinking blood. There's something in the way they clear their throat, or they have a gurgle in their throat. And remember, this is the chapter where Hephzibah protects Clifford, and we began to get to know a little bit about Clifford. I don't know if you knew this. The judge offered to bring Clifford and her to live in the country with him. Why is he so interested? Do you know yet? Unless you've looked to the end of the book. Don't tell us if you know for sure. But why is the judge so interested in Clifford? Okay, well, you might want to guess, but we'll find out. There's a reason. There's a particular reason. And at the end of the chapter, Phoebe, she's described as so innocent that she can't believe the judge would be a bad person. Because look at him. Look at his resume. Look at what he's accomplished. He's been to Congress. You know, he's a judge. Look at him. He looks so good. She can't imagine respectable-looking people not really being that way. She doesn't have any hypocrisy in her. So anyway, that just tells you a little bit about her. The next chapter, Clifford and Phoebe. Remember, he loves beauty, and I'll sort of quicken this. But he doesn't like Hepzibah appearance. He doesn't like to look at Hepzibah. He likes to look at Phoebe. She loves him anyway. That is, Hepzibah still loves Clifford and takes care of him. But she is hurt that she is so unattractive that he doesn't want to look at her. He likes looking at Phoebe. He loves beauty. It's his weakness, in a way. And what is the effect that Phoebe has on him? Hey, thanks. Yeah.
She like makes him feel young again.
Yeah, and you remember the time, and I think it's in the next chapter, he's up in the, looking out the window and he's blowing bubbles, you know, like, it's like a child. He becomes younger and younger. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but he has really been born again. And he's become a child again, which literally you can't do, but that's been his effect on her. And notice, it's on page 98, so she's compared to a flower. So Phoebe is a lot like Alice Pynchon. Again, why am I telling you all this is because I know I get the same details every year. And details you can pick up on any Cliff Notes. You can probably pick these up too if you read the Cliff Notes carefully. You know, that's kind of interesting not to read the Cliff Notes carefully. But these are the details, and you can be wrong. You can be wrong about your analysis because you left out something about the character that you misinterpreted something, or you just didn't know that. So that's why the more of the book you know, the more you're able to be accurate about your analysis. The Pension Garden, just the fact that it's outside is one of the few places that's positive in and around the house. It's kind of it has flowers. He loves flowers. He said that Phoebe is like a flower and light. So page 103, the garden is compared to Eden. And the bees are compared to little wizards on page 102, which is the magic thing. You know, their face, and at the end of the chapter, he sees faces in the well. They're not bad faces, except for one, but he looks in the well and he sees their faces, which is kind of a creepy thing, although they're positive, smiling. It's still that idea of being haunted. We talked, the word ghost is used a lot. Phoebe thought Clifford was a ghost because he didn't see him. She just heard him. She heard his presence before she knew who it was. So they know the house is haunted. So this is one of those themes, the magic. Remember, Phoebe is like a charm. She charms people. She puts spells on people. She's not at all a witch, but it's witch-like, and it keeps that theme going on of ghosts and the supernatural. Let's see, the beautiful faces. Yeah, okay. So, and the Sunday dinner. Make note of that. I know one year they asked on the AP, think of a book that has a celebration in it, like funerals, weddings, or dinners. And it was Davis. I was really impressed with it. I said, can you right now think of a book you've read that has a celebration in it or has multiple celebrations? It seems to be a theme of that book. Can you think of books that you've read that some form of formal celebration, like funerals and weddings, but also in meals. Well, I don't remember it so much in, I think there is dancing in Pride and Prejudice, right? I know it's in Emma. So that would be an example. And you know what he mentioned, which really impressed me? He said Beowulf. I think, wow, you know, you're right. Every time Beowulf killed somebody, they had this big celebration. They gave him loads of gifts. Happens 2 or 3 times in the book. I think it's 3 times. Happens twice in Denmark, and then when he goes home. And I thought, wow. Typically, you wouldn't get an opportunity to write about epic poetry, but that's what's a huge part of those books, of that book. And it becomes a theme. It becomes an idea that the author's trying to get across. Well, that's what you have here. You have this scene, they're eating. It's about halfway through the book. You know, it's kind of centrally located. And then remember, Uncle Venner always talks about that farm he wants to retire to. I don't even know if there is a farm. But it's a dream of his. And what's the pension dream? Yeah. That mythical property, which if you read it carefully in the first chapter, you already know something about that property. What is it? The narrator told us in the first chapter, it probably belongs to somebody else. That 200-year-old deed is probably useless. So they're all seeking, and you know that the judge has an interest in that. They're all seeking something that we already know is probably completely useless. There are people been living on that land for 100 years. Are they going to give it up because you show some worn out deed? No. You're going to have to. There's no authority in New England that's going to allow you to do that. So it's a lie. It's a false hope. All right. So that's and then chapter 11. We've spent some time on this. That whole thing. What is the theme of that? The fact that they want to get out. They enjoy looking at life outside the window, but when they try to go to church, the house draws them back in. What's that about? How does that fit into the big picture of the book? What did Maul do to? What did Matthew Maul do to Colonel Pynchon from the gallows? He cursed him. Isn't that an example of a curse? These people cannot leave the house. In fact, they've been cursed. And they can't leave. And they're so weak, they can't overcome that. And part of the theme of this book is community. That's going to be a theme of several books. Another thing to look for is the idea of community. What is the value of it? I mean, as Christians, we know better than anybody, really, what community is. You're given a chance every week to have communion with your fellow Christians. What's the value? It's never seen as a bad thing unless it's a mob or something. But it's usually a very good thing. That coming together is sort of a goal, that we do better together than apart. And they want to be a part of that, and they do on Sundays, but they can't leave the house. It's it's in the garden, so it's not in the house. They just got to take the next step to get out of the house. So if you've read far enough in the book, you know what's coming. So anyway, this is an important scene here, and the things that they look. How about, that's called the arched window, by the way. And then the daguerreotypist. I actually put this online. I should have told you that from the beginning. This is on my website. It's on Mike Caldwell. These very notes. But can you tell me about him, by Holgrave? What is it that he does not like? What is it that he not like? Nobody remembers? What does he not like? Something he hates. Like, there's a lot of things. They can fill in one category. He does. He hates the past. He thinks that houses should be torn down and you have to build a new house every generation. He even said families need to start over. Like, after so many generations, you just start over the family. There's no more Powell family. There's no more you can think of your family. You just have to start over. You have to start making new connections. He says that, but then he doesn't really, in a lot of ways, he doesn't believe that. I saw this past week that families are unfair. In society, that it's not fair that you live in a particular family you do, where, remember that line of success, people are doctors, lawyers, and there's money there. That's just not fair. That should be broken down. You have an unfair advantage. I've just actually said this. The nuclear family is unfair. It's not just. Because it has inherent, you don't determine whose family you grew up in. The very things we're talking about here, people have actually said, we got to break down the family, which is crazy, but we know how much the family means to God. But that's actually, he says the same thing, though he's not a crazy person. He's young. He hasn't read much. I think that's interesting. He even admits that. He doesn't read much, but he thinks a lot. That's part of this chapter. And I had this quote, it's on page 128. To plan a family, this idea is at the bottom of most of the wrong and mischief which men do. Once every 50 years, families should start over. That's actually one of his theories that we're seeing people articulate today. It's a real thing that people actually have thought before. And then 13 is the big chapter where Alice Pynchon, it's a long chapter, and we won't go into a lot of these details, but it's important to recognize what actually happens. Make sure you know that. I think it's interesting on 133, the house is described. I won't read it, but it's the bottom of 132, 133. It says things like this: the house had a pleasant aspect of life, which is like the cheery expression of comfortable activity. They got lots of kids. There's a lot of activity, there are a lot of servants. The house is not like that at all. That's another part of the curse. Now they have one person, now 3 people live in the house. Hepzibah, her brother, and Holgrave, as opposed to 100 years earlier, it was this happy thing where people are active because the curse is still doing its job. It hasn't completely ruined the family. So even 100 years ago, this family was active, vital, and alive. Now it's nothing. It's down to almost nothing. I think that's the house itself. Remember, is a metaphor. And also keep in mind that Phoebe and Alice are a lot alike. They're in the same family, the Pynchon family, but they're the people of the family that have life in them. And you know what happened to Phoebe. And at the very end, remember there are 3 men in this vision that that Alice is looking at, and one has the deed, and the other 2 are refusing to let Alice, who's seeing all this, see it. And they even cover his mouth so he won't say anything. So at the end of that Matthew said, we'll never discover the deed. He's not right about that, but it's still, anyway, they can't get it at this point. All right, so, and then we finish with chapter 14, which I won't go into much because it's simply her leaving. You know, she gets out of the hypnotic trance that Holgrave has accidentally or on purpose put her, and he releases her from it. And I think we mentioned this last week. What kind of person is she now compared to the person when we first met her? What does the narrator say about her? Well, I know Dr. Talbot, we were talking about Dr. Talbot likes the awkward silences. I don't like them either. But I think that's pretty neat. You know, sometimes it's just won't say anything for a minute or so and you get really excited. Yes?
When she entered the house, she was very happy and smiling all the time. But when she left, she was very sad and her mood changed.
And what's caused, and she's not very sad, but she's not the same flower that she was when she came in. It's good. What changed her?
I think the fact that she had to deal with all this trouble and see all these things happening
Yeah.
really affected her mood.
So she was willing to kind of sacrifice herself, and it's changed her, not necessarily for the better, by being around these people. All right, so that's some background. I hope you took some notes, at least mental notes, that I think I couldn't remember that. So please take care of this. Keep this in mind when we come Monday. I have us down for a quiz. We might not have one. I might decide, but I've got one, and I've alerted you. So as we go out today, we have about 10 minutes. I have a little poem here. It's an easy poem to understand, not that long. Not that you can't handle a hard one, but for today, it's probably appropriate. There's a little multiple choice quiz at the end. I'm not taking it as a test or quiz, it's practice. But I'd like you to do it, and at least before we walk out of here, I'll give you the answer. I think that's exactly what it is. All right, this is a poem. You don't always get the name of the author, but it's Robert Troy. Need the next one? All right, read it, and I think there are 11 questions, and we'll go over the answer. I'll give you the answers before we go. And please write on it. That's something you should always do whenever you read. If you see something, I'll circle it and make a note of it.